Welcome back to the channel. I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, and I love that. So before we dive into tonight's journey, just take a second to drop a like. It helps me keep making more of these long, dreamy stories for you to drift off to. Tonight's tale is the beginning of something special. A hidden thread woven through the Harry Potter universe, a secret connection between the magic of Hogwarts and the dynasty of the 1990s Chicago Bulls. What if I told you that during Harry's very first year at Hogwarts, while he was discovering magic and ancient mysteries, he was also quietly shaping history on another kind of court? That Michael Jordan wasn't just a basketball legend, but part of something older? This is the story of rhythm, prophecy, and movement. Of runes hidden in rebounds and spells cast through pivot steps. This is Harry Potter and the Secret Dynasty, Year 1, The Stone and the Shot. Let's begin. The boy who lived had not yet lived very much at all. On the edge of Little Whinging, in a 2-square house with 2 clean windows, Harry Potter spent most days avoiding being seen. In the cupboard under the stairs, he learned early how to make silence a shield, how to move as though he had no weight, no shadow, no name. The Dursleys made sure of that. On the morning the world began to change, though no one would know it until much later, the fog outside was thick enough to muffle the sound of the post falling through the letter slot. Harry, 11 years old and bone-thin from years of being half-fed, was scrubbing out a saucepan when he noticed it, a second envelope on the mat, oddly shaped, and smelling faintly of something warm and electric, like static before a storm. He had never seen American postage before, and certainly not anything like this. The stamp showed a man mid-jump, frozen in mid-air, arms spread, one hand outstretched, a ball almost glowing between his fingertips. The name on the envelope was unmistakable, though written in looping, unfamiliar handwriting, Mr. H. Potter, cupboard under the stairs, 4, Privet Drive. Harry glanced behind him. Dudley was still upstairs, whining about a loose joystick on his newest console. Petunia was clattering about in the kitchen, muttering about fingerprints on the toaster. He picked up the letter. Inside was a single sheet of thick parchment, cream-colored and surprisingly heavy. No return address. No explanation. Midnight, Chicago time. Find the flicker. Between the bounce and the breath. Harry blinked. That was all. No sender. No signature. He turned the paper over. Nothing. Just then, Vernon shouted for him to bring his tea, and Harry shoved the letter into his shirt pocket and ran. That night, after the Dursleys had gone to bed, Harry lay awake. He could feel the parchment warming against his chest like it had a pulse. He didn't know what Chicago time meant, not really. Only that it sounded American, like the voice he sometimes heard faintly through Dudley's television when he'd sneak into the lounge late at night. There had been a game once, with men running back and forth across a polished floor, one of them moving like he'd been carved from air itself. Dudley had called him Jordan. The name rang like a bell in Harry's mind. Just before midnight, something unusual happened. From his tiny window, Harry saw it, a ripple in the air, hovering just above the neighbor's hedges. Like heat rising from a road, but shimmering silver. He stood. Opened the window. The air outside was thick and damp, but that shimmer called to him. There was no sound. No wind. Only the faintest thump, like a heartbeat, or a ball against wood. And then, it happened. The shimmer opened. Not like a door, not really. More like a fold in the air, like the world had blinked. And beyond it, for the briefest moment, Harry saw something impossible. A long hallway lit by overhead lights, floor gleaming, red and black banners hanging like house flags from high above. A man stood alone on the court, dressed in red and black, bouncing a ball slowly, each movement as fluid and controlled as a wand in motion. The man paused. Turned. And looked straight at Harry. Not startled. Not confused. But as if he had expected him. As if he'd been waiting. The shimmer vanished. Harry stumbled backward, heart racing. He looked down, the letter in his pocket was gone. In its place, a thin line of silver dust trailed across the floor, curling into a question mark before fading entirely. He didn't sleep that night. The next day passed in a blur. The Dursleys, mercifully, had an outing planned, a trip to see Aunt Marge, who disliked children even more than Dudley disliked vegetables. Harry was left behind with strict instructions to weed the front garden, mop the kitchen, and under no circumstances watch television. But Harry didn't care. His thoughts were somewhere else, half in the strange shimmer he'd seen, half in that polished court, and fully in the steady eyes of the man who had looked straight at him through the tear in the air. That man, he'd realized it now, was Michael Jordan. The name, the face, the presence, it all matched what he'd glimpsed on magazine covers Dudley had tossed aside. But what was he doing in a place that didn't exist? Or did it? Was it real? Was it magic? When the Dursleys returned, loud and grumbling, Harry had already retreated into his cupboard, pretending to sleep. But under his thin blanket, he was wide awake. Waiting. Listening. Heart ticking alongside the clock. Midnight approached. And at midnight, just like the night before, the air shifted. Not outside this time, but within the cupboard. A seam opened along the far wall, slow and soundless. Light leaked through. Not the golden light of candles or the flicker of a torch, but a white-blue gleam, cool and sterile, like gymnasium fluorescence. Harry reached out. His hand passed through the wood, or what had once been wood. He took a breath and stepped forward. The cupboard fell away behind him, and he was standing in a locker room. It was quiet, humming faintly. Rows of metal lockers gleamed in soft white light. Jerseys hung with ceremonial care, white, red, and black, emblazoned with numbers 33, 91. 23, the scent was distinct, liniment, rubber, leather, and something faintly electric. And there, not 10 feet away, was the court. A full-size NBA hardwood floor, bordered by crimson lines, opened like a spell circle. The lights above were dimmed, but a single spotlight pooled at the far end. A lone figure moved there. Gliding. Floating. Michael Jordan. He was practicing. Not for an audience. Not for a crowd. Just him and the ball. Dribble. Pivot. Fade away. The arc of the shot was so precise it looked rehearsed by time itself. The ball whispered through the net. Again. And again. A meditation in motion. Harry didn't dare speak. Didn't dare move. He watched. Watched the way Jordan's body seemed to flow like ink, how his feet barely kissed the floor, how his arms moved like they were guided by music no one else could hear. It wasn't just skill. It was something else. Something deeper. Harry felt it. The man paused suddenly. He turned, slowly, and met Harry's gaze once more. No fear. No surprise. "You came," Jordan said, his voice low, calm. American accent, clear as glass. "Good." Harry opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jordan smiled, not kindly, not coldly, but with recognition. "You felt it too, didn't you?" he asked. "In the bounce. In the space between." Harry managed a nod. Jordan walked to the edge of the court. "I don't know what they call it where you're from," he said, voice even. "But here, it's rhythm. Flow. Magic, if you like. Real magic. Not tricks. Not illusions. But the kind that makes time slow. That makes the impossible." He turned suddenly, launched a shot from nearly half-court, and hit nothing but net. "Feel like muscle memory." Harry stepped forward, into the light. "Are you a wizard?" Jordan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not like you. But I've seen the edges. I've touched them." He stepped aside, nodding toward the court. "Go ahead." Harry blinked. "I've never..." Jordan held up a ball. "Try." It was heavier than he expected. The leather was worn, grooved perfectly where fingers should rest. Harry stood at the free throw line, awkward in his oversized clothes. He bounced the ball once. The sound echoed like thunder in a cave. Bounce. Breath. Bounce. He shot. It arced, wild and high, but something happened mid-flight. The ball straightened. Tilted. Glowed faintly gold, just for a moment, and dropped neatly through the net. Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You'll do." And just like that, the court dimmed. The shimmer returned. Harry turned, and the locker room began to dissolve. "You'll be back," Jordan's voice said, as everything faded. "There's more coming." The light swallowed him whole. And when Harry opened his eyes, he was back in his cupboard, the floor cool beneath him, his heartbeat steady and quiet. In his hand, impossibly, he still held the ball. The morning sun broke across the hedges like a golden apology. Birds chirped with insistent joy, as if unaware that something impossible had happened the night before. Harry awoke with the basketball still beside him. It was real, scuffed and weighty, still warm to the touch. He hid it quickly under an old towel before Dudley could come crashing through the hallway, demanding breakfast and television rights. The cupboard door opened sharply. "Get up," Uncle Vernon barked. "No slouching today. We've got company this afternoon. Important people." Harry mumbled his usual reply and shuffled out. But the whole time, scrambling eggs, rinsing pans, dodging Dudley's sulking threats, his mind was racing. What had he done? What had he stepped into? And why had Michael Jordan, of all people, spoken to him like he'd known him his whole life? Just after midday, when the Dursleys were distracted by the neighbor's new car, the second letter came. This one didn't arrive through the mail slot. It wasn't delivered by owl, though that would soon become familiar. It simply appeared, tucked neatly inside the kitchen clock, where no letter had ever fit before. The handwriting was different. Neater. Slanted with precision and dignity. The envelope was heavier, embossed with a red wax seal stamped with a bold H. Mr. H. Potter. The cupboard under the stairs. 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Harry's heart stuttered. This was the letter he'd heard about in dreams he didn't remember. The one he half believed would arrive someday. The one that belonged to a life not shaped by Dudley's tantrums or Vernon's red face. He opened it with shaking fingers. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress." Harry read it 3 times, then stared at the floor. There it was. The name. The truth. The reason for every oddity he'd ever witnessed, the hair that grew back overnight, the impossible leaps when Dudley's fists came flying, the way lights flickered when he was scared. Magic. A real school. A real place. A place that had known about him all along. But just as he was tucking the Hogwarts letter into his shirt, he heard the whisper of parchment again. A second note had slipped out of the envelope. "Some are born with magic. Others earn it. But you? You're stitched between. Keep the ball close. Both games are about to begin." There was no signature. That night, after another long dinner and a quiet excuse to take the rubbish out, Harry pulled the basketball from under his towel. He dribbled it once against the pavement. It didn't glow. It didn't shimmer. But the sound echoed. It echoed across the garden like a question, like a challenge, like a secret waiting just beneath the skin of the world. And in the upstairs bedroom, above the cupboard, something stirred. A photograph on Dudley's shelf, torn from a sports magazine and nearly buried under wrappers, shimmered faintly. Michael Jordan, midair, suspended for eternity in his red and black. But now, there was something else. Behind him, in the crowd, at the very edge of the photo, was a boy. thin, round-glassed. Watching. Harry. King's Cross Station smelled of coal and echoes. It was late August, and the air clung with the residue of summer. Sun-warmed stone, paper dust, and the scent of trains that had long since vanished into the horizon. Harry stood quietly beside his trolley, the Hogwarts letter folded neatly in his coat pocket, his heart pounding in ways he couldn't explain. It had all happened so fast. One moment, Hagrid was giving him a birthday cake on a rock in the sea. The next, he was walking through Diagon Alley with coins that gleamed like sunlight and a wand that had chosen him, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple and strange. But none of that felt quite as strange as the quiet weight of the basketball now hidden in the false bottom of his trunk. He hadn't dared leave it behind. It no longer glowed or hummed. It was silent, ordinary. But Harry felt it, always, like a second heartbeat. He found platform 9 3/4, like the letter said. Found the red-haired family who taught him how to run straight through the barrier. The train was real. The magic was real. All of it. And yet... He kept thinking about the court. Hogwarts Castle rose like a dream carved from mountain and fog. At night, it shimmered with torchlight and 1,000 windows, each flickering with possibility. During the day, it breathed with the movements of hundreds of students, voices echoing down stairwells, laughter twisting through the courtyards. Harry took it all in with a kind of stunned quiet. The great hall with its floating candles, the ghosts drifting through walls, the staircases that shifted when they pleased. It was magnificent. But the feeling returned, just as it had in Chicago. At breakfast, the sound of spoons tapping bowls sometimes mirrored the bounce of the ball. During his first broom lesson, when he lifted off the ground for the first time, there was a sensation in his chest, weightless, fluid, utterly familiar. And then, late one night, it happened again. He couldn't sleep. The dormitory was still and quiet, the other boys murmuring in dreams. Harry slipped from bed, drew on his cloak, and stepped softly through the common room. The fat lady in the portrait gave a small snore and did not stir as he slipped out. The corridors were shadowed, lit only by the occasional torch. He wandered aimlessly, not sure where he was going until he found himself on the 3rd floor, the corridor that had been declared off-limits. There, nestled between 2 suits of armor, was a door he hadn't noticed before. It was plain. Wooden. No handle. But Harry felt drawn to it. He placed a hand on the surface and, without thinking, whispered, "Open." The door slid away into shadow. He stepped into darkness. The room was vast, domed, echoing. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, vanishing into blackness. And in the center of the room, lit by a single shaft of moonlight, was a court. Not a Quidditch pitch. Not a dueling platform. A court, full-sized, hardwood, polished to a spectral shine. Faint red and black lines shimmered just under the surface, like veins of molten light. There were no hoops. No balls. No crowds. But Harry recognized it. This was the court he had seen. The one in the shimmer. The one beneath the shimmer. He stepped forward. The moment his shoe touched the floor, the entire space rippled like he'd dropped a pebble into still water. He heard something. A voice. Not out loud. Not in his ears. In his chest. This place remembers rhythm. And you, Harry Potter, are not the first to walk between. He turned in a slow circle, eyes wide. Who are you? The light shifted, dimmed. From the far side of the court, a figure began to emerge, not solid, not ghostly, but something in between. Tall. Hooded. Wrapped in long robes stitched with silver thread. On the chest, an emblem. Not a house crest, but something else. A wand crossed with a curved line. Almost like a basketball, Harry whispered. The figure nodded. There have always been those who feel both games. Magic and motion. Wand and court. Most forget. Some remember. Michael Jordan, Harry said softly. He's one of them. The figure did not answer. But something shifted in the air, agreement, like the nod of a tree in wind. You've stepped onto the path now. And the court will remember you. The light blinked out. And Harry was standing alone in an empty hallway. The door behind him gone. He returned to bed silently. The others hadn't stirred. But that night, as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of Quidditch, not of spells, but of a single ball arcing through air, spinning against starlight, its path as certain as fate. October swept into Hogwarts on the back of a cold wind and the scent of burning leaves. The trees along the forbidden forest turned from green to gold, and the lake grew glassy with the silence of early frost. Inside the castle, students began donning scarves and gloves, their laughter fogging the air as they rushed between classes. Even magic, it seemed, had seasons. Harry had settled into his first term with the quiet, cautious rhythm of someone used to living on the edge of other people's conversations. He wasn't the loudest or the fastest, though he was quickly learning he was one of the more curious. Hermione Granger had taken it upon herself to supervise his academic survival, while Ron Weasley offered endless commentary on everything from exploding snap to wizarding sweets. But beneath it all, Harry carried a question, one he hadn't dared ask aloud. The court was gone. He'd searched every hallway of the third floor since that night. The door had vanished. No shimmer. No whisper. And the basketball in his trunk remained silent, dull, like it had returned to its muggle shell. But Harry had the feeling it was waiting. Listening. The clues, if they could be called that, came slowly. It started in History of Magic, of all places. Professor Binns, monotone, translucent, and utterly indifferent, was droning about the magical conflicts of the 14th century when Harry, only half listening, caught a phrase that made his heart jump. And the arcane games of Cordoba, where enchantments and athleticism were once bound into a singular event, long forgotten, banned after the incident with the shifting runes and the lost court. Harry's quill stopped mid-word. "Professor," he said, which in itself was strange enough to make Ron drop his book. "Yes, Mr. Potter." Binns didn't look up. What was that about a lost court? The ghost blinked slowly, as though recalibrating. Ancient magical recreation. Largely ceremonial. A blend of dueling, divination, and movement-based precision. He sniffed vaguely. The court was said to predict outcomes. Measure destiny. Highly unstable. Quite banned. Do we know where it was? No one knows. Only fragments remain. The court was sentient. Harry felt the chill even before Binns said it. Not in his body, but in the memory of the way the floor had rippled beneath him. Later that week, during a herbology walk near the forest edge, Harry drifted. The rest of the len tree stump, weathered and smooth. Carved into the bark were markings, not letters, not runes Harry recognized, but loops and arcs that spiraled outward like the lines of a court. A center circle. A three-point arc shapes that didn't belong in the forest. He bent closer. The grooves were faintly glowing, red and gold. There, nestled within the rings, was a symbol, a wand crossed with a line. Not unlike the one on the figure's chest. Not unlike a key. He reached out and touched the stump. The moment his fingers made contact, the world tilted. Images filled his mind, not visions, not dreams, but motion. A ball spinning through air. A whistle cut by wind. A voice, not his own, calling plays in a language of rhythm and tempo. Red jerseys streaked across a court that pulsed like a living spell. And above it all, a steady beat, bounce, bounce, breath, bounce. Then it was gone. He stumbled back. Leaves rustled, though no wind stirred. From the shadows, something moved. It wasn't a centaur. Too small. Not a unicorn. Too quiet. It looked almost like a student. But not in Hogwarts robes. This figure wore something else, dark red with black sleeves. Number 23. Harry blinked. The figure turned and was gone. When he returned to the castle, hands cold and heart racing, he found something new tucked under his pillow. A single page, torn from a book. No title, no notes. Just this. In times of balance, the court of motion will reveal itself to those who move between worlds. Where wand meets will, and rhythm becomes prophecy. Harry didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in weeks, he took the basketball from his trunk and placed it at the foot of his bed. And in the stillness of the dormitory, as candlelight flickered against the stone, he swore he saw it glow. November arrived in a hush of frost and long shadows. By now, Hogwarts had become a rhythm of its own, lessons by day, warm meals by firelight, the wind howling through ancient towers. Harry was getting better at transfiguration, worse at potions, and increasingly restless when silence fell at night. He kept the basketball beneath his bed now, hidden between spare robes and an old blanket. It hadn't glowed again since the night of the forest, but sometimes, in the quietest hours, he swore he heard it shift. Not roll, shift. Like it was aligning with something he couldn't yet see. It was Ron, ironically, who gave him the next clue. They were late one evening, dragging their feet down from the astronomy tower after a particularly long star mapping session, when Ron mentioned the trophy room. Fred and George reckon there's stuff in there from way before even Dumbledore, he said, yawning. Real old teams. Dueling champions. Gobstone legends. They even found a plaque once for someone who enchanted a discus to fly straight through a mountain goat. But Harry had stopped walking. Teams? He asked. Ron blinked. Yeah, school competitions. They used to do a bunch of weird sports before Quidditch took over. Not just brooms. Even, like, indoor stuff. Indoor stuff. Dunno, Ron shrugged. That's what George said. Some of it got banned. Said there was a whole section of trophies from the movement era or something. Never looked into it. Harry didn't sleep that night. And before dawn, he was up, shoes laced, cloak wrapped tight, and the Marauders map, liberated from Fred and George in exchange for a favor, clutched in hand. The trophy room was always silent. It lived in the third-floor corridor, behind a set of double doors that rarely opened, except for Filch's obsessive polishing sessions. But this morning, before even Peeves stirred, Harry slipped inside. The room stretched farther than he expected, glass cases upon glass cases, brass gleaming, shields mounted like echoes of forgotten duels. Quidditch cups from the 1800s. Prefect badges from founders' heirs. A tiny, cracked vial said to contain the last tears of a defeated dueling champion. He moved carefully, scanning. And there, tucked in the farthest case, past shelves of dust-covered names and forgotten glories, he found it. A trophy shaped like a hoop. At first, he thought it was simply decorative. But then he noticed the plaque. School of Motion, House Champions, 1847 for excellence in rhythm-based conjuration and dynamic spell formations. There were 4 names, carved deeply into the base. The last name stopped him cold. 8th Dumbledore. It couldn't be. But even as he stared, the letters shimmered faintly, almost embarrassed by their exposure, and faded back to brass. Below the plaque was a tiny velvet shelf, and resting atop it was something that looked like a wand grip, but curved. Leather. Worn. Harry touched it. The room shifted. Just slightly. The glass fogged for a second, and through it, he saw something. Not clearly, just the outline of a court. The echo of players moving. Red jerseys and black. One hand lifted, calling a silent spell. A ball spinning, suspended in time. The glass cleared. And there, beside the trophy now, was something that hadn't been there before. A folded square of parchment. He opened it carefully. To conjure movement is to understand time. To master time, you must surrender control. Begin not with spells, but with steps. There were lines beneath the writing, arcs, dashes, marks that looked eerily like play diagrams he'd once seen in a Muggle magazine on basketball strategy. but woven between them were faint magical runes. Runes for balance, flow, release. Harry tucked the parchment away. That night, while the castle dreamed, he cleared a space in the common room. The fire had burned low. The windows fogged with cold. He dribbled the ball once. Then again. And slowly, he began to follow the steps. Not just the play. Not just the runes. A pattern. The first movement in a dance that began long before Hogwarts and long before Chicago. A sequence that felt like a spell but didn't need a wand. And as he moved, he felt it, something opening. Somewhere far away, in a place lit by stadium lights and banners that rippled like house flags, a man in a red jersey paused mid-dribble and smiled. It was nearly winter when the change in Professor Snape became impossible to ignore. Not that Snape had ever been warm. From the moment Harry had stepped into the dungeons for his first potions lesson, the man had radiated a quiet disdain, simmering just below the surface like a poorly sealed cauldron. But now his eyes lingered longer. His questions came sharper, often aimed at Harry with the precision of a hex. He never called Harry by his name. Only Potter. And lately, he had started watching him move. It began after an incident in defense against the dark arts. A class Harry hadn't expected to find useful, considering Quirrell's stammering and the smell of garlic that lingered around the man like a fog. They'd been practicing basic wand parries when Harry instinctively dodged a misfired jinx, not with magic, but with a step. A spin. A pivot. As if the spell were a defender and his body knew the counter. Quirrell had blinked and stammered, "Very quick reaction, Mr. P. Potter." But Snape, who had been observing silently from the rear of the room, narrowed his eyes. From that day forward, the potions master had taken a particular interest in Harry's posture, his hands, his stance. It was unnerving. One afternoon, Harry was summoned, alone, to Snape's office. The room was dark and humid, lined with shelves of jars that looked like they were better left unopened. Snape stood at his desk, fingers laced before him, eyes gleaming beneath the candlelight. "You've been practicing something," he said without preamble. Harry's throat went dry. "Practicing?" Snape stepped closer. "Movement. Not dueling. Not Quidditch. Something older." Harry said nothing. Snape's lip curled. "I once studied under a master of silent spellcraft. He believed that wandless magic, true wandless magic, was born from discipline of the body, not the mind. That before you could cast without a word, you had to master rhythm." He stepped around the desk. "I thought it nonsense. Until I saw you step through a spell like it was a ripple in water." Harry clenched his hands. "I didn't." "You did." Snape's voice was cold, but not angry. Almost curious. "There is a pattern to how you move, Potter. A tempo. You're not casting. Not consciously. But something in your rhythm is altering the world around you." Silence. Then, quietly, "Where did you learn it?" Harry's mouth opened. Closed. There were no words he could offer that would make sense. No way to explain a court that didn't exist, a bull that sometimes whispered, and a man on the far side of the ocean whose movements made time bend. Snape watched him. And then, strangely, he turned away. "Go." Harry hesitated. "Now." That night, Harry returned to the common room later than usual. He didn't take the stairs to bed. Instead, he stood near the hearth, watching the fire twist and shift. He thought about Snape. About what he'd said. And he realized something: he had begun to feel the movement before he acted. Not just in dodging spells, but everywhere, in how he climbed stairs, how he caught falling books, how he leaned into turns between corridors. His steps weren't random anymore. They carried a kind of echo. A memory. He pulled the folded parchment from the trophy room out of his pocket. Laid it on the table. Traced the diagrams again. Then, slowly, he stood. He moved through the sequence once. Twice. By the third pass, his breath had synchronized with his step. The firelight cast long shadows behind him, and the faintest shimmer of gold glinted off the floor. When he turned toward the window, he froze. Outside, across the sky, a long black owl was gliding, not flapping, not swooping. Gliding. Straight toward the castle. It dipped. Banked. And dropped something onto the ledge before vanishing back into the dark. Harry crossed the room, heart beating steadily. On the ledge was a box, small, square, wrapped in deep red velvet. No note. No seal. He opened it. Inside was a ring. A ring shaped like a coiled serpent, black onyx and red enamel, with a number 23 carved subtly into the inner band. He slipped it on. It fit perfectly. The castle was cold. Stone absorbed winter like a secret, exhaling it in the night through walls and floorboards and every breath of wind that slipped past the windows. Harry had taken to wearing extra layers under his robes, not just for warmth but for comfort. Padding against the creeping sense that something was about to shift. Christmas was approaching. The halls of Hogwarts glittered with wreaths and enchanted icicles, and the great hall shimmered beneath floating snowflakes that never melted. Students whispered of presents and feasts and snowball fights. But Harry had something else on his mind. The ring. It hadn't come with instructions, but from the moment he slid it on, he'd felt aligned. Not powerful, exactly. But focused. He could see openings in movement now, gaps in crowds, angles in staircases, silent cues in body language. It was like reading a game in real time, even when no one else knew one was being played. He began practicing more frequently. Late at night, when the tower was asleep, he would clear the common room and move through the sequence from the parchment, adjusting, flowing, improvising. Steps became passes, gestures became feints. And sometimes, just briefly, the space around him would blur. Like he was on a different court entirely. And then, just after midnight one snowy night, he stumbled into a room he hadn't meant to find. He'd been exploring, restlessly wandering the corridors after a dream left him too alert to sleep. No shimmer this time. No ripple in the air. Just a door ajar at the end of a hallway he didn't remember entering. Inside, it was empty, except for a tall, ornate mirror. The frame was gilded, ancient. At the top, carved into the arch, were words in spidery script. 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑 on wosi. Harry stared at it. And then stepped closer. At first, he saw only himself. Pale, slight, wrapped in 2 long robes and oversized slippers. But then the image changed. He was standing on a court. Not Hogwarts. Not even the shimmering court from his dreams. This one was real. Bright lights. A crowd roaring so loudly he could feel it in his ribs. And beside him, wearing red and black, was Michael Jordan. They weren't playing, just standing. Watching. Waiting. Jordan turned. Looked at him. Nodded once. And then faded. In his place appeared another figure. A younger man, with sharp features and dark robes. He wasn't dressed like a player. But he moved like one. Fluid. Balanced. Focused. Harry didn't know who he was. But in the reflection, the man was holding something in his hand, something Harry couldn't see. A wand? A ball? He blinked. The mirror returned to normal. The next night, Harry returned. And the next. Each time, the reflection shifted. Sometimes he stood alone. Sometimes with teammates he didn't recognize, witches and wizards dressed in strange uniforms, half basketball gear, half dueling robes. Sometimes, he saw plays unfold, not on a court, but in life, arguments dodged, staircases turned just before Peeves appeared, spells cast instinctively at perfect angles. The mirror of 𝒍𝒆𝒑, Dumbledore would later say, showed not your face, but your heart's deepest desire. But Harry wasn't sure. It didn't just show what he wanted. It showed what could be. A world where motion was magic. Where strategy wasn't written in scrolls but in split-second choices. Where he belonged, not only in Hogwarts, but in something older, stranger, shared. A tradition passed not through wands, but through movement. Through flow. On Christmas morning, while the others tore through sweets and scarves, Harry received 2 gifts that made his breath catch. From Hagrid, a hand-carved whistle, shaped like a griffin's beak, with runes along the stem that meant focus and flight. From an unknown sender, a set of black wristbands, simple and soft, each stitched with a red 23. He wore them all day. January arrived with a pale sky and breath-frosted windows. Snow blanketed the lawns outside Hogwarts in layers too thick for footprints to last, and the lake froze at the edges, glazed with wandering ice patterns that looked like sigils. Inside the castle, it was exam season. The older students stalked the corridors with stacks of books and red-ringed eyes. First years, less burdened, still felt the weight of winter, a quiet slowing of things, a pull inward. Harry, however, was speeding up. The court was returning to him, not visibly, not physically, but in fragments. Each movement he rehearsed at night came easier now, as if his body remembered before his mind did. And strange things were happening around the edges of that practice. When he turned too quickly in the corridor, torches flickered with his spin. When he pivoted sharply to avoid Peeves, the poltergeist missed entirely, his prank flying into a suit of armor instead. Even Ron had noticed. "You're moving different," he said one afternoon, watching Harry dodge Filch with unnatural ease. "Like, smoother. Like you see things before they happen." Harry didn't answer. He didn't know how. But it was true. He felt things now. Angles. Openings. Patterns. It wasn't just in Hogwarts. Letters from Hagrid, now filtered through slightly more official channels, started including cuttings from the Daily Prophet, but also, occasionally, from the Daily Telegraph. Basketball reports. NBA scores. Names Harry had only begun to learn. Michael Jordan. Scottie Pippen. Horace Grant. Bill Cartwright. Phil Jackson. The Chicago Bulls were surging. Each article came with red pen markings, sometimes highlighting a play, sometimes underlining a phrase. Momentum turned at the half. Jordan shifted positions instinctively. The triangle offense is being called divine. Divine. Harry folded one article carefully and slipped it between the pages of Quidditch Through the Ages. It felt safer there. That night, in the common room, Harry began drawing. Not for class. Not for fun. Just lines. On parchment. Arcs. Trajectories. Diagrams. Half runes, half plays. He wasn't sure what they meant until he laid 3 pages side by side and saw it, a formation. Not for a spell. Not for a sport. For a ritual. There was something beneath the movements. Beneath the game. A shape in the paint. The next breakthrough came in charms. Professor Flitwick had just finished a lesson on Protego, the shield charm, when Harry, idly bouncing his wand in one hand, asked a question that made Hermione's eyes narrow in suspicion. "Can you cast a charm by moving, instead of speaking?" Flitwick paused. "A non-verbal charm, yes. Quite advanced. Usually requires wand motion combined with clear intent. But what if the motion was the intent?" Flitwick blinked. "That's philosophical." He gave Harry a long look. But not unheard of. Some older traditions believed in kinetic casting. Movement-based spell work. Lost after the Ministry began formalizing dueling technique. Harry nodded slowly. He knew. He was casting without knowing the incantation. The step became the spell. The spin became the ward. The leap became a burst of speed that wasn't physical, but magical. A few nights later, the basketball. Long silent, rolled out from under his bed on its own. He picked it up. and found, carved faintly beneath the grip, something new. Not English. Not Latin. A rune. The same symbol he'd seen carved into the stump near the Forbidden Forest. The same one he'd drawn by accident in his notes. The one stitched into the edge of the wristbands. A looping curve, intersected by a line. He traced it with his finger. And saw, not in the air, but in his mind's eye, a court illuminated. Not Hogwarts. Not Chicago. Something older. The Court of Motion. It was real. And he was standing in its echo. By late January, the air in Hogwarts had grown sharper. Snow still clung to the window sills, but the promise of thaw stirred restlessly beneath the ice. The castle, ever responsive to mood and magic, seemed to pulse with anticipation. Something was coming. Harry felt it in his spine. His dreams had changed again, less symbolic, more vivid. He no longer saw mere flashes of courts or whispers of red and black banners. Now, he was in the plays, running the floor alongside faceless teammates, exchanging passes with shadows who moved like echoes of people he hadn't met yet. And always, watching from the edge, was the man in number 23. Jordan. Not coaching. Not commanding. Just witnessing. Testing. It was during a routine defense against the dark arts lesson that the pressure finally cracked. Professor Quirrell was droning about counter curses, clearly distracted. Most students had given up listening. Draco Malfoy, however, had not. He'd noticed Harry's shifts, how he moved differently now, even sat differently. As if the space around him belonged to him. Draco didn't like it. So when Quirrell called for volunteers to demonstrate basic disarming, Draco's hand shot up like a snake. "I'll take Potter," he said, all silk and smirk. The room tensed. Harry didn't hesitate. Fine. They stepped into the open, wands in hand. Harry's was steady. Draco's twitched with the E. A play. His foot touched down at the edge of the classroom's stone circle, and something flickered in the floor. A trace of red light, circular and faint. The ring on his finger grew warm. Draco tried again, panicked Expelliarmus, but the spell bent wide. Not because it missed. Because it was redirected. Harry raised his wand at last, slowly. Not to attack. But to channel. He extended it in a diagonal line, one he remembered from the parchment. A passing route. A handoff. A gesture of continuity, not conquest. A pulse of magic left his wand, silent and golden. It didn't strike Draco. It passed over him, like wind through tall grass, and left the boy blinking, speechless. Quirrell dropped his chalk. Neville clapped without realizing it. Harry lowered his wand. The duel was over. That night, back in the common room, Ron and Hermione surrounded him with questions. "What was that?" Ron asked. "You didn't even cast properly." Hermione was quieter, scanning a book as if hoping to find a chapter titled "When Your Friend Turns into a Spell Athlete." Harry simply said, "I didn't need to cast." And he knew it was true. The movement had done the work. The steps had become structure. The rhythm had built the defense. The next day, a package arrived. No name. No return owl. Inside was a clipping from a Chicago newspaper, creased, worn at the edges. A game summary. Jordan's no-look assist seals overtime win. He credited trust in timing. When asked about the pass, he said, "You don't always need to see the lane. Sometimes you just move into it, and it's there." Beneath the article was a folded card. "You're learning. There's more court beneath the castle than anyone knows. And not all of it is asleep. J." Later that evening, Harry cleared the common room and unrolled a long scroll of parchment across the floor. Not classwork. Not Quidditch strategy. A court diagram. Only it wasn't basketball. And it wasn't entirely magical. It was something in between. Plays layered with spell matrices. Runes where screens would be. Diagonal cuts mapped like arithmetic equations. Movement that cast without words. Patterns that could protect or unlock. He called it the motion sequence. And deep in the night, while the others slept, Harry danced it out again. Alone, quiet, moving through time like a whisper of what was to come. Each step a thread. Each pivot a prophecy. March arrived like a hush. Cold clung to the air longer than expected, and snowdrift still crouched in the shadowed hollows beneath the hills outside Hogwarts. Even the lake seemed slower, its surface dull, its creatures hidden deep. But in the forbidden forest, the world was never still. It pulsed. Not with sound, but with presence. Harry had only been once, and that had been accidental. This time, it was punishment, or so it was called. Detention, alongside Hermione, Neville, and Draco, for sneaking out after hours. Filch had caught them near the charms corridor, parchment in hand, half-drawn court diagrams shimmering faintly under the invisibility cloak. Hagrid had met them at the edge of the trees. "You'll be looking for what's hurting the unicorns," he said gruffly. "Dark business, but it's just watching and reporting her back. No wand work. No games." Harry said nothing. But he felt it even then, that hum. Like the court, but older. Wilder. They split into groups. Harry went with Draco and Fang, weaving through roots and fog as the trees swallowed them whole. An hour in, they found it. Not the unicorn. Not yet. But a clearing. Wide, unnatural. The ground was flat, unusually smooth. Moss grew in spirals. Trees circled it like sentinels. And in the center, faintly etched into the earth, was something Harry recognized. Lines. Not animal trails. Patterns. A court. No wood. No hoops. No markings as a muggle would know them. But the shape was there, older, worn, but undeniable. The center circle. The lane. The arc. He stepped into it. And the forest shifted. Not with sound. With sensation. Draco called after him, but the words came muffled, as if underwater. The clearing whispered. Not in English. Not in any one language. But in movement. A shadow moved across the far edge, tall, robed, half-wrapped in bark and starlight. Not a centaur. Not a ghost. It stepped forward, arms outstretched, not threatening. Not welcoming. Inviting. Harry moved. Slowly. And the moment he matched the shadow's posture, bent knee, low stance, hand lifted in gesture, the ground beneath them began to glow. Not brightly. But in pulses. Bounce, breath, bounce. The rhythm returned. And the voice came, not in his ears, but in the soles of his feet, in the ring on his finger, in the weight of the basketball waiting back in his trunk. The forest remembers the first court. Before brooms. Before wands. When movement was the spell. When flow was the faith. Harry blinked. The shadow had vanished. And there, in the center of the clearing, lay something shimmering beneath a thin veil of snow. A stone. Flat. Circular. Inscribed with a symbol he'd seen before. The wand and the line. He picked it up. The forest exhaled. When they returned to the edge of the trees, Hagrid was waiting, concerned. "Didn't see anything?" he asked. Harry shook his head. "No unicorn. Just moss." Hagrid nodded, but gave him a long look. "Some places in there," he said softly, "aren't just wild. They're old magic. Magic that doesn't use spells." Harry nodded once. He understood. Back in the dormitory, long after curfew, he unwrapped the stone. It wasn't just a relic. It was a key. Its weight was perfect. Like a basketball shrunk down to a single rune of memory. And etched along the edge, too small to notice until moonlight hit it just right, was a word. Initiate. May descended like a storm held in suspense. Exams loomed, tension stretched thin between students, and whispers of something darker stirred just beneath Hogwarts' polished surface. Rumors circled like hawks, the third-floor corridor, Fluffy, the trapdoor. Harry could feel it all pulling toward a center point. But he was moving differently now, not just with speed, but with purpose. The ring on his hand thrummed lightly, and the stone from the forest never left his pocket. He kept it close, like a compass that didn't point north, but to something deeper. The court. And the court was waking up. The final trigger came late one night, in a dream that wasn't a dream. He stood again on the hardwood floor, not Hogwarts stone, not the ghost court in the forest, but a perfect convergence of both. Lit by candles and stadium lights alike. At the far end stood Michael Jordan, arms crossed, eyes focused. Behind him, the shadowed crowd of every court Harry had ever glimpsed, figures half in robes, half in jerseys. Jordan stepped forward. "Time's coming," he said. "You ready?" Harry opened his mouth, but no words came. "You've seen the floor," Jordan continued. "You've felt the pattern. You know it's not just about the shot. It's about the space before the shot. The rhythm." He held out a ball. It hovered, glowing gold, humming with ancient runes. Harry reached for it. And woke up. In his trunk, the basketball pulsed once. The next day, everything happened at once. Hagrid's secret slipped. Fluffy was revealed. The stone, the Sorcerer's Stone, was real, hidden beneath Hogwarts, and Voldemort wanted it. Dumbledore was gone. McGonagall was too distracted to notice 3 first years creeping out after curfew. It was time. The trapdoor led to puzzles. Challenges. Trials. But Harry saw them differently now. The Devil's Snare? A tangle of roots that moved with rhythm. Step through them, don't fight them, dance, and you survive. The chessboard? Not war, but play. He read the positions like a formation, finding the gaps not with force, but with timing. The flying keys? Like chasing the snitch, yes, but also like navigating passing lanes on the court. Move not to where the key is, but where it will be. One by one, he passed the tests. And finally, he stood before the mirror. Not alone. Quirrell was there. And beneath him, as Harry now understood, the shadow of Voldemort. The confrontation unfolded like a possession in the 4th quarter. Harry didn't have a wand up. He didn't need it. The stone wasn't in the mirror yet, but the mirror had already shown Harry how it would be found. Desire, yes. But shape desire. Directed. In motion. Quirrell moved to grab him. Harry stepped. Not back. Not sideways. A pivot. A half spin. A weave through a lane no one else saw. The stone was in his pocket. The mirror cracked, not shattered, but split, a spiderweb of possibility. Voldemort screamed. And Harry shot. Not a spell. Not a ball. A release of energy. Drawn from his steps, his breath, his balance. A burst of movement so clean, so pure, that it formed a ward stronger than any wand. Quirrell crumpled. The stone sang. And everything went white. When Harry awoke in the hospital wing, the basketball was beside his bed. Untouched. Unscuffed. But when he picked it up, he saw a change. Beneath the familiar seams, runes had emerged, barely visible under the leather, like ink drawn into the grain. And on the palm, a handprint glowed faintly. Not his. Larger. Stronger. And beneath it, burned into the air for just a moment, was a message. Every great shot is a choice. Every choice is a court. The game is bigger than you think. Rest up. June arrived like the last page of a long, winding book. Hogwarts glowed with sunlight that filtered softly through ivy-draped windows. Exams had ended. The corridors felt lighter now, emptied of tension. Laughter returned, and trunks were packed slowly, almost wistfully. Harry moved differently now. Not just because of what he had done, but because of what he understood. The castle was more than walls. Magic was more than spells. And destiny was not written, it was played. The court of motion was real. Not always visible, but always present. The day before the train, Harry visited the third-floor corridor once more. The trapdoor had been sealed. The chessboard swept clean. The mirror of 𝒆𝒑 removed, its frame cold and blank. But on the stone where the court had once shimmered, Harry saw a faint new line. Barely visible. A semicircle. A free-throw line. He stepped up to it. Closed his eyes. And shot. No ball in hand. Just a gesture. The echo rang out anyway. Swish. The train ride back to King's Cross was quiet. Hermione read. Ron slept. Harry stared out the window. The letter was in his coat pocket. Folded neatly. No return address. 6 rings. 6 titles. 1 rhythm. But the best games are the ones that teach. We'll meet again. J. Tucked beside it was another note. Smaller. In handwriting he'd seen once before, etched onto a stone deep in the forest. Year 1, initiated. Court alignment, active. Threshold opened. He didn't know who had sent it. But he knew what it meant. The court wasn't done with him. And he wasn't done with it. Back at Privet Drive, the summer settled around him like a fog. The Dursleys resumed their routine, barking rules, measuring his meals, locking the cupboard door even though he no longer slept there. But Harry didn't fight them. He didn't need to. Because at night, when the house fell silent, he would open his trunk, unwrap the basketball, and trace the runes with one finger. And then, barefoot, quiet, steady, he would move. Step. Pivot. Pause. Spin. Extend. Breath. The plays weren't just practice now. They were memory. They were magic. They were home. Harry Potter began his journey not only as a boy entering the wizarding world, but as something rarer. A figure walking the unseen line between magic and motion, spell and sport, prophecy and play. What began with a mysterious letter bearing a glowing image of a man mid-air, Michael Jordan, unfolded into a year of awakening, not just to wands and potions, but to the forgotten art of the court of motion. At Hogwarts, Harry discovered more than floating candles and secret passages. In the silence between spells, he found rhythm. In the patterns between classes, he found playbooks. And in a shimmering vision during his first night, he saw Jordan himself, training in an otherworldly court where reality folded and rhythm became ritual. Haunted by dreams of hardwood lines and runes etched into ancient stumps, Harry unraveled a lineage of kinetic spell work, movement as magic, balance as protection, and plays that acted like incantations. Each step, each pivot, was part of a deeper flow that echoed through his instincts and whispered across oceans to courts far from England. Simultaneously, in Chicago, the Bulls' 1991-1992 championship season unfolded like the other half of Harry's year. Jordan's moves, silent passes, mid-air reorientations, impossible fadeaways, were more than athleticism. They were messages. Through enchanted tape reels and news clippings marked in red ink, Harry tracked the plays, mirrored their rhythm, and found himself participating in a story whose shape bent reality itself. Throughout the year, Harry uncovered fragments of the forgotten court, etched lines in the forbidden forest, trophies hidden behind glass, diagrams disguised as charms exercises. Even Professor Snape, sharper than he let on, began to suspect Harry's unnatural fluency in space and tempo. In the final trials beneath the castle, Harry faced not only Quirrell and the shadow of Voldemort, but the moment where movement became shield, choice became defense, and release became protection. He didn't cast in the usual way. He moved. The stone was saved. And in the final days before summer, he received 2 notes. One from Jordan, a quiet nod to shared rhythm and trust in space. The other from an unnamed force deep within the magical tradition. Year 1, initiated. Court alignment, active. Threshold opened. Harry returned to the Muggle world different. Not louder. Not braver. Just aware that the court was always there. Even beneath carpet and concrete. That the game was still unfolding. That the true court isn't made of wood or stone. It's made of movement. If you're still with me, or if you're waking up again now, thank you for listening. There are more Harry Potter stories waiting for you here on the channel, full of slow magic, secret halls, and quiet wonders. And if you'd like to hear what happens next, Year 2, and what unfolds in the chamber and beyond, drop a like or leave a comment to let me know. Until next time, sleep well. And keep moving to your own rhythm.